Okay, 75 years of the bat. Welcome to my bat cave, my office here at work. You can see my beverage desolation here. I got my Coke. Thanks a lot. My water here to my initials. This I take to my classes and drink while I'm lecturing so I don't get a dry throat. Got some vitamin water here I'm working on. These are expensive in Japan though. Who do we got today? Georges Braque. It's my calendar of the day. So my reason for turning on the camera today is this article in the Japan News. Government urges schools to mull merging, and this was in the Tuesday edition of the newspaper. So basically, I wonder if I can put this over here. Maybe. Uh, it's pertinent if you want to be an ALT, if you want to become over to Japan as a jet, because things are changing here about education. Now, the government's talking about bringing more and more ALTs over, which is great. But you should know that the population of Japan is shrinking, especially the young population. People are having less babies. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. And the really telling stat from this story is in 1956, the Ministry of Education, so 1956, 66, 76, 86, 96, 06, 16, what's that? 60 years ago almost, stated that primary middle school should have from 12 to 18 classes. That's what they felt, a public school that's open, a shogako, an elementary school, or a middle school, a junior high school, a chugako, should have 12 to 18 classes. Now, primary school is 6 grades, 1 through 6 generally. So that would mean 2 homerooms per grade level. Okay? And if a homeroom really shouldn't exceed 35 children at the primary school level, that's obviously, meaning if they have, say, 50 first graders, they have 2 classes, 25 and 25. Okay? And if it's a junior high school, there's only 3 grade levels, 7, 8, and 9 in America, but they call it 1, 2, and 3 in Japan, Ichi Nensei, Ni Nensei, San Nensei. And that would mean 4 classes, 4 homerooms per grade level to get to 12. If they go below that, then, they supposedly would have to merge or something. Now, at the time that they said this, there were 12.53 million primary school students nationwide in Japan. So 12.5 million kids in that sort of age range from, about 6 or 7 years old to about 15. Okay? Now, when I was teaching as an ALT in Izumo, in Shimane-ken, I had 2 junior high schools by the time I finished my 5 years, and both of them had about that number, that minimum number, about 450 students. So what they did was they would, if they had 150 kids, they would just divide that by 4, and they'd have a class of 38 and a class of 38, and another class of 37, and so on. And so you'd have 4 homerooms. Once they had 161 students or more, they had to then legally get a 5th homeroom, and that happened a few times at Taishichu. We had more than 160 kids in a grade level, and so we had 5 homerooms, which was great because then you take that number and divide it by 5, and you end up with class sizes instead of 39 or 40 kids of like 31 or 32, and it makes a big difference, believe me. And I think one year they did it just out of the goodness of their heart. They must have had money or something to hire another teacher, because it does require them to hire another teacher to teach that, to be that homeroom teacher, and to teach additional classes. I think we had 158 or something, and they just decided to divide by 5, which was fantastic. I always liked the smaller classes. And a lot of times what we did in English is we divided the classes anyway. If we had a class of literally 39 or 40, we would do an A and a B, and we would go into different classrooms and teach them 20 at a time. But as you know, if you've watched my channel, I had some really small shogaku. I had some really small elementary schools. I had one up in the mountains of Usagi in a small fishing village which had 10 or 11 kids the 5 years I was there. I had a small school out by a famous lighthouse that again was up sort of, off the beaten path in Taisha, that had about 35 to 40 kids over the 5 years I was there. So these were classes where it was like they had like three homerooms. They combined the first and second graders, the third and fourth graders, and say the fifth and sixth graders, and they had less staff, etc. So what this thing is saying is now they used to determine a lot of it was based on distance. How far do the kids have to go to get to school? And they based it on how far the kids had to walk or ride their bike. So a school could stay open because they could justify it by saying, look, we're servicing this small community of kids, and how else would they get to school? They would have to go so far. They can't walk or ride their bike to, Izumo Taisha, the school that's right next to the shrine. It's just too far. But now they're saying that for the first time, the standards would be within about 1 hour by bus or other forms of transport, which is incredibly, hugely different. First of all, no kid wants to commute frickin' 1 hour to school. Some kids do it here for high school, believe it or not, because they want to go to a certain high school. But yeah, I mean, no kid, especially when you're in like you're 8 or 9 years old, wants to be on a bus or something like that. And they don't have school buses in Japan. Like they don't have yellow school buses that like take you, like that are bought by the school for the most part. The kids here, if they travel to school, they use public transportation. So they use the city bus, and they have special passes and stuff. And obviously a lot of kids get dropped off by their parents too. But a lot of kids just, they do bike very far distances and walk pretty far sometimes too. So that's amazing. So that right there would those two schools that I was teaching at, boom, they would be closed, and those kids would be forced to kind of commute down the mountain, as it were, to Taisha, and probably go to Taisha Shogaku, which was fairly big. It was 2 homerooms per grade level. So I'd say 60 times 6, it'd probably about 350 kids around there for an elementary school, which is not a bad size. I had another one, Araki, and another one, Yokon, and they had 1 homeroom per grade level. So they maybe had 25 to 30 kids per grade level, so 150 to 175. And some of these kids could go to one of those schools too. But so that's a big change. And it says about half of the nation's roughly 30,000 public primary middle schools have less than 12 classes right now. And did I give you this stat? Oh, in 2014, okay, there were only 6.5 million students. So that's the huge change in Japan right there. 12.5 million 1956. Last year, 6.5 million. So basically half. And 30,000 schools that are operating in in Japan nationwide that have less than 12 classes. And you think about that school with only 10 kids. I mean, they had a teacher for the youngest, a teacher for the slightly older. They still had a vice principal. They had a person there that kind of like ran the office, like a secretary lady. They had another guy that did their like school lunches. I mean, the staff sometimes, it was like, these places. So, on a cost level, it makes total sense. And obviously they can kind of predict. I mean, they can look at the area. They have census material. They know how many like 5-year-olds are in the area that are going to grow up and potentially go to their school. So, it's saying here primary schools with 7 to 11 classes, middle schools with 4 to 11 classes will be asked to think about their future educational environment based on factors as how many students they expect to have in the coming years. So that'll really change. I mean, part of the reason I know we had some ALTs in Taisha that came and were dissatisfied with their job for instance, is that they came one time when we kind of had a boom in ISMO and we had a lot of money to spend in the Board of Education. And so they said, okay, every junior high is going to have their own ALT. So a junior high, for instance, out in, kind of even more in the boonies than sort of central ISMO, where there's literally only 3 homerooms, one 7th grade classroom, one 8th grade classroom, one 9th grade classroom. I mean, they can only have English with those same 3 classes so often. They just were bored. Those guys were bored, especially if they weren't given elementary schools to go to, which at that time they weren't. Keeping ALTs busy is a good thing. You don't want so many schools that you just never get attached to any one. I've talked about it many times. I enjoyed my first 3 years quite a bit because I had one base junior high where I spent most of my time, and that's where sort of my desk was, and I went every day. But then I would go off to the 5 elementary schools that fed that junior high. So I even had a bigger continuity because when the kids graduated from the elementary and came to the junior high, they already knew me, and I already knew them a little bit from having taught them when they were 4th graders or 5th graders or 6th graders and so on. And then in my last 2 years, they added another junior high. So I did a week at one and then a week at another and a week at one and then a week at another. And even that was okay. It dilutes that kind of impact you can have a little bit, and the frequency with which you can see your students and etc. But it was still okay. More than that, I think, would have been too much. So it's a fine line, and they have to use their resources, ALTs, as best they can. But that's a big, interesting change. So if I see more information like that, I'll let you know. I just thought I'd pass that along. They want more English at the elementary school level. And I think for those of you that want to teach at that level, the other thing that you can do for yourself that will help, that a lot of JETs in the past haven't had, is the ability to speak Japanese, because you're going to be interacting with teachers that are homeroom teachers that teach, all the subjects. They teach science, and they teach math, and they teach music, and they teach PE, and there aren't necessarily English teachers like you get in high school and junior high. So your ability to speak Japanese will help you out quite a bit in that situation. Okay, that's it. Just wanted to let you know that piece of information. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon. Peace. Oh no, 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 no. What am I doing? Okay.